Welcome to episode 3 of Pitch Black Beacon. You're here with your hosts, Carly and Joshua. And today we are going to be talking about transitioning out of your fears and into better habits. So in talking about transitioning from fears into like better life habits and better skills, what is one thing that people need to be aware of in starting their transition out of the fear spectrum?
I would have to say that you have to be aware of your thoughts. You have to be aware of what you're telling yourself, what you're thinking about day to day, and how those thoughts are infiltrating what you want to become in the future. That's where I would go with that. Because
When you
essentially what you tell yourself is how you end up in one spectrum or the other. If you're gonna continue the old, well, this person talks about me and I take it to heart, that's going to keep you in that lower spectrum whereas when somebody's like, oh, well, this person said something about me, but yeah, whatever, I don't believe it. So,
Mhm.
you're going to feel a little better about yourself. That's more confidence within yourself, and you're going to end up progressing into a higher vibration from just that.
Well, and just owning what thoughts that you're going to give energy to and which ones you're going to dismiss on their way out. It's funny because like when you say infiltrate, like what thoughts infiltrate, my immediate thought was like this like wave of thoughts coming in and you having like this little gun shelter and being like pew 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 like Space Invaders, like which one's gonna get through, you know?
Yeah, you
And it's
gotta
just
set up
like
your
you got to
bunkers.
prioritize like which alien is going to come through in Space Invaders and which ones are worth running the risk for, you know?
They have to have the multi-pass.
Yeah, exactly. So, in talking about the fear spectrum, for those people who aren't familiar with it, let's define, like, for people, like, what is the fear spectrum and what is the
Uh,
polarity of that being the love spectrum?
yeah.
Because when people hear love spectrum, I feel they think like that's very big and broad. And like a lot of people don't know what love is because they don't have self love. And I feel like a lot of people think they have self love. I mean, I thought I had self love for a really long time, but I realized that what I had was like a tight hold on my fear. And I was able to manage my fears, but I was not liberating myself from my fears. And so didn't really have self love until I sat down in that fear spectrum. And like you said, like gain that understanding and that awareness of my thoughts and what they were telling me, and then choosing how to not have them in my life because I think for a lot of people, they think, well, I have these thoughts, I have these fears, I have these bad habits, I have, anger issues, anxiety, depression, whatever. And they think, well, that's just what I have to deal with. And it wasn't until you and I started becoming friends and I started expanding my knowledge on things that I realized that those aren't things that you have to deal with. They're things that you have to let go of and to pass on, but they don't have to be a constant in your life. And if they do come back into your life, you don't have to feed into it.
Yeah, that's true. That's
So
that's a lot.
can you talk to a little bit about the fear spectrum and like what that meant to you and like how you
Sure.
like to communicate that to people?
So when I talk about fear spectrum, I'd like you guys to understand that that when you say things like I'm in a dark place, I'm very sad, I'm holding
Going
on to
through
this
something.
anxious, yeah, going through something, I'm holding this anxious vibration or anxiousness. That's all part of the fear spectrum. That's saying like, or if a situation, there may be conflict and you're too afraid to confront it, or something happens and you freeze up. Those are the kinds of things that keep you in the fear spectrum because you don't have that confidence to move forward from that or face it. Because essentially, the only way to get from one side of the spectrum to the other is to face those individual fears. And there are many of them. There's not just one specific, there's always going to be a challenge, there's always going to be that fear, and there's always going to be something put in your way that will test you to see how you're growing. Like,
Like a
okay,
hurdle.
a hurdle, yeah,
And do
like a
you look at the
hurdle.
hurdle like a wall that stopped you, or do you look at it as something you have to jump over? And I
And
think the more
eventually get
you,
over to walking over it
well, I was just going to say sometimes just walking around it, just not
or
even
walking around
engaging
it.
with it, you know, once you
Yeah.
build up that habit in yourself. Because I feel the fear spectrum, what I'm hearing you say is it's that the habit of inviting these negative components into our life and allowing them space to stay.
And if you really want to get more technical about it, it's sadness, it's grief, it's depression, it's anxiety, it's um, self-loathing, it's uh, just any of those bad,
Mm-hmm.
negative feelings that bring you down, the things that make you feel like you're worthless, or if you're feeling just blah, like I just can't do something in life. I just can't push myself forward. Well, that right there alone is keeping you there. Even the word I can't is keeping you there because you're already telling yourself subconsciously that, hey, we're not going to do this because
We're
I'm telling
incapable of
you,
it.
I'm telling you you're not going to do this because that's essentially what you're doing. When you say words like I can't or no or I'm not going to or stuff like that, you're telling
You're
yourself
planting the
already.
seed.
You're planting that seed of already
Mm-hmm.
self-doubt. You're already doubting yourself, and that's something that you have to work on eliminating or recognizing first, and then you can begin that transition is when you recognize it. And then once you recognize it, that's when you can go into, well, how do I change this? How do I
Mm-hmm.
make a plan? What can I do different? Who are the people I'm surrounding myself with? What in life have I been doing that I can just move away from? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the challenge. Is that's the first step challenge. That's really going to be the most difficult
For
for
a lot of
anyone.
people.
For
I know I
anyone.
saw an interview one time with Matthew McConaughey where he said that he doesn't allow the word can't in his household because,
Exactly.
and I remember being in volleyball and I would be like, I can't do it, coach. And she would, I think she would either bench me or make me like run laps or something or lines when I would
Can't
say the
do it,
word
huh?
can't.
Get over there and run
Right, because
because
she
you're
was
about
like,
to.
well, because she knew I could, but she was trying to break me of my anger cycle that I had because, if I didn't show up 100% on the court, then I'd be like, I can't do this and then
Yeah.
get mad and then that affected the team and she wasn't going to tolerate it. So anytime she heard me say the word can't, she made me physically do something to drill it out of me and
Yeah.
it definitely changed my attitude, but I with the fear spectrum too, I heard you say when these things come in, I want to note for people that like it's not bad that the negativity comes towards us because part of us is still attracting that negativity. It's what we do with it when it comes towards us, right? Because we might have these
Right.
thoughts of self-loathing or self-pity or depression or grief. And at times, especially with grief, like there's a necessary process of dealing with it, but it's when you allow it to take hold of you in a way that like
To
cripples you or
overcome.
affects your
Yeah.
life, right? And so some of these things are natural components of being human. And I don't, because I definitely got stuck in a fear cycle trap where I would have like something negative come up and then I had either thought it or engaged with it or let myself be angry or sad. And then I would self-shame for being like, oh, I should have been perfect. And I wasn't. I was human. Instead, I should have taken that negativity and said, hey, I had this negative moment. I let it last a couple of minutes, where before it would have lasted a couple of weeks. And
Right.
that's huge progress and that's human. And now I'm letting it go and I'm moving forward.
Yeah, I guess I should have thrown that in there. I always forget the.
And that's where I just wanted to like note it because what you said was correct. But for those highly emotional people, like I am at times as well still, because it's a habit that I'm learning to build a muscle out of and into a better regulated emotional state. I just wanted to highlight that really quick.
Right. Yeah, because it's what you do with the energy that makes the
Mm-hmm.
difference. Like you said, grieving, there is a necessary time to grieve. You should grieve because grieving is healthy. However, if you let that run your life for 5, 10, 20 plus years, like
And
for
some people let it
instance,
hold it their whole life.
right, and for instance, like my best friend passed away and his mother obviously is was devastated, but her man, she is a strong woman because she took her grieving for about 2 years and then turned it finally into something positive, and she is just booming. She is getting things done. She has turned her whole life around, and that
That's
came with
awesome. That's a lot of strength.
struggle, came with strength, and it came with um a process of grieving. And because it was her child, it took a little longer. Different grievings, different processes, different time lengths, but it's how you get stuck, or if it gets you stuck, and how you deal with that is where it's going to make the difference. If like you said, if it lasts your entire lifetime, then yeah, that's a problem. um
Or you let it have
Couple,
be an excuse for how you choose to behave.
or yeah, yeah, if you
And
exactly.
with the example that you gave about your friend's mom, I just want to say that like you said, she had her grieving period. There's obviously like a extreme sadness that goes with that. And then you're like, now she's just fucking crushing it and just like making things happen as being super productive. And I think that is, towards the end of the episode, we can talk about this more, but that just goes to show how, people who have extreme sadness or extreme emotions in the fear spectrum, the contrast to that is extreme hope, extreme joy, extreme happiness, extreme productivity. It doesn't negate the thing that caused you to have the fear in the first place or be in that fear spectrum in the first place. But the nice thing about people who do experience big life events or big emotions or stuff like that is that if you can learn to condition them to be in the love spectrum, you get to have that intensity in the love spectrum as well, where you're just rocking it all the time. And people who take risks on themselves, a lot of people like to play it safe. So they like to have a threshold of how much they let themselves be sad and how much they let themselves be happy, because that's where they're content and that's what balances. But they're flirting with that neutral line quite closely. And it's the people who allow themselves to be honest with themselves, to experience their feelings and their wounds and their everything, that give them, and then they take the habits and the challenges to sit in those discomforts and to outgrow them and to no longer entertain the negativity in their life. Then they get to start entertaining positivity and the
Right.
same intensity as what they experience the negativity. And that is such an abundance. So, Joshua, what moment in your life was it that you felt like this need to, like, do you have the self-awareness of you being living too much in the fear spectrum, and what encouraged you or motivated you to change?
I would have to say that when I decided to change, it was an incident on St. Patrick's Day. um I don't remember the year, but I was 25. And myself in that time in my 20s, I was really heavy on alcohol and other drugs, experimental, whatever, whatever I did. And at that time, I was really wasted and something was happening. I opened my mouth, and then something happened to me, which kind of was like, okay, my head was split open. I went through a window. I was bleeding everywhere. Just that was in that moment. I looked at myself and I was just like the next day, and I was just like, okay, what's going on? And this was the point where you will get, if you decide you really want to change, you will sit in front of a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
You will look at yourself dead in those eyes, and you will say, enough is enough. I'm taking back control. There's going to be stuff that's going to be different. It's not going to be easy, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to start that path of change. And when you say those words out loud and you say them to yourself, that resonates higher inside of you. And then you're gonna actually take it a little more serious. And then you have to learn, like in the last couple episodes, we talk about being disciplined. We
Mm-hmm.
stay disciplined. It doesn't matter about motivation. It doesn't matter about all this other whatever distractions. I need somebody to help me, this, that, or the other thing. It's you need to stay within yourself,
Mm-hmm.
discipline. That will get you to where you need to go. And if you don't, then you're going to fall back into the old habits, and then you're going to have to start all over again. And
Hmm.
and that happens, and it does happen. It happened to me many times. They call it falling off the wagon or whatever, backtracking, whatever you want to call it,
Backsliding. Yeah.
backsliding. It's going to happen. So you have to accept that as well, because we're only human, you know? So
There's something that you said that I loved so much that I want to emphasize is that you said you don't need other people to be involved in your process. You have to stay disciplined within yourself because other people in our experience and journey of life, like they are tools, they are inspirations, they're also discouraging. It just
guidance,
depends on who you are surrounding yourself with in your energy. They say be in a room with five motivated people, you'll be the sixth.
right?
And so it just depends on who you're surrounding yourself with. But I like that you said that so much because as somebody who, is a like recovering people pleaser and still working at it from time to time, you often think that like I used to do what I used to call was survey. I used to survey everybody for decisions that I would make. And then I would base their advice on which one weighed more and which people I was most interested in pleasing. And then I would take action in my life based on that. And then that was me living for other people. And so, when you're learning to become within yourself, you have to realize that this truly is a journey that is yours and yours alone, and that other people are going to have advice. Other people are going to be inspired by what you're doing. Other people who have been your person for forever might not understand it and fall to the wayside because they don't understand the changes that you're trying to make for yourself because maybe they're sitting in that same energy. Maybe they also have to change too, And so, at the end of the day, this is your journey and only you get to decide what it is. And everybody else around it can influence it and they can have advice, but you're the one that has to do the work. You're the one that has to sit in the discomfort. Other people can sit in that discomfort with you, but you're the one that has to sit in the discomfort and to be brave. And the more you have the courage to do that alone and get comfortable with doing it alone, the quicker the results you're going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, y- and also you have to want it more than somebody else wants it for you. So
Mm-hmm.
you literally have to make those decisions. Yeah, you can't let other people
Live your life.
make the decision for you. Like I've known people where they're like, "Well, what do you want me to do? What should I do? How should I live like that? How should I do this?" And I'm like, "Bro, I'm not going to make the decision for you. I can help guide you. I can tell you which direction that I feel you should go into, but I can't make that decision. I can't push you. I'm going to go in this direction. Should you choose to follow, you may pick up the lessons that I'm leaving behind
Behind.
from that I've already learned. So
Mm-hmm.
now you can pick them lessons up and read those lessons and take charge of your life because I'm already a few steps ahead. I don't have a problem with bringing you into that direction and teaching you some stuff and letting you learn and the experience, but you have to pick that up. You have to pick
Mm-hmm.
that book up. You have to pick up that experience.
You
You
have to
have
put
to
in the
live
work.
through it. You have to go through the work and hit those shadows and face yourself because that in itself, that's what fear is.
Mm-hmm.
It's your
Mm-hmm.
shadow that sits beneath your subconscious that's keeping you below. It's
Interesting.
keeping you from your growth. So
Because sometimes our shadow gets casted in front of us and sometimes it gets casted behind us. And so are they fears of the past or fears of the future?
right.
Or are you standing
And
on top of your fears and conquering them and stepping through them? So I love that analogy.
yeah, and that's the only way to do it. And that's the only way you're going to succeed with that fear spectrum and conquering it. As since we're still talking about the fear spectrum, that's
Mm-hmm.
like when you're sad, you got to find something that makes you happy, right? If you're sad and the counter
Dwelling on it.
reaction is happiness, you're gonna go
Mm-hmm.
find something that makes you happy and you're gonna sit in the happiness. If you're
Mm-hmm.
anxious about something because you're thinking it too far into the future, well, pull yourself back and sit in the present. Look at what you have around you. Look at where you're at. Maybe take yourself and sit next to a stream or go into the woods or if you're living in a big city, maybe there's a cool under the bridge area you like to hang out in. I used to do that as a kid. I
Mm-hmm.
used to go hang out by the creeks and streams that were underneath bridges, or
Hmm.
abandoned houses that, people would hang out in, skaters, we would all skate there.
Yeah.
Um, that's something that brings you happiness, is the counter reaction to fear.
Well, and that's why I really like if people can Google this too, like the image of the feeling wheel, because it gives you like if you're sad, the opposite feeling is this. If you're anxious, the opposite feeling is this. And so for me, I found it as an overthinker, I found it very, very helpful because I was like, oh, well, I'm anxious. Okay, I can't just stop being anxious. What am I going to do instead? And like my brain would break, right? And so if I could look at that feeling chart and be like, oh, well, the opposite of anxious is exercise or something. I'm like, oh, well, then I'll go exercise because now I know what to do instead of that anxiety. And it gave me a replacement to fill in. So I learned to have these default settings. When I feel sad, I go do this. When I feel this, I go do that. When I have this, and I set myself up for success that way. And for me, when I realized the fear spectrum that I was sitting in, I was actually a moment when I was looking at myself in the mirror and my body wasn't what I wanted it to be because it was physically manifesting the self-hate that I had for myself. And I had to look myself in the mirror and tell myself like that I'm beautiful, I'm loved, I love myself, I have purpose, and that things are going to get better one day at a time. And no matter what shows up in the mirror, I'm going to count it as progress because sometimes things get worse before they get better, right? That threshold right before you break through something. And with me dealing with the physical components that I was dealing with my body, that was absolutely true. Things got worse before they got better because my body was detoxing from all the self hate that I had. And without doubt, even on the worst of days, I looked at myself in the mirror and I kept saying that, like, I'm beautiful. This is progress. I'm accepting this and I'm moving forward. And when I started doing that, my mindset started changing. I started having like more courage in myself because my body was telling myself like that it no longer hated itself and actually loved itself. I started having more energy. I started gaining more clarity of like what I wanted for myself in my life. I started sleeping better. I started having, I started seeing different opportunities and engaging in friendships that I hadn't engaged in before because they were now resonating with what I was wanting for myself. And I found myself in this space where I was wanting other people who were telling themselves the same things that were coming into my life and no longer the people who were sitting in that self-hate. Well, this is just how the situation, so I just have to learn to make the best of it. That mentality of like, well, nothing's really going to change, so you just got to find the joy in it is one of the most defeating mentalities that I've ever heard, because even in shit situations, like you can still find happiness and joy, sure, but it should never come with the attitude of like, well, it's never going to get better, so I should just be okay with it. Like
Right.
that's just very much,
It's
and
just ridiculous.
some people don't see that they have outlets where things can change, or maybe they don't believe in themselves that they can change. But when I started telling myself physically that I could, it was not easy. Like during my transition of coming out of the fear spectrum and into the love spectrum, I went through cycles of wanting to fall back and, like you said, backsliding. And I had to keep catching myself. And I had friends like you or other people where I would call and be like, hey, I'm holding myself accountable because I'm noticing I strongly want to feed into this bad habit. And by calling you and telling you that I'm aware of this bad habit, like I'm hopefully holding myself a little bit more accountable to not doing that bad habit. And that was helpful. But the thing is the challenging part for me is like, I felt like when I called my friends, then I became codependent on my friends being my accountability. And I had to learn how to transition, which was good for a time when I was first building that muscle. But after a while, once that muscle was built, I needed to transition off of that accountability externally and start having internal accountability where I no longer needed to call my friends to be accountable for things. And I could start holding myself accountable regardless of what my friends' availability was, right?
Yeah. But that goes into the transfer, the transmutation of that energy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's good to have those type of people around,
A good
and
support system.
a good support system to be like to at first, and you'll need that at first for sure, because
Mm-hmm.
I needed it. Everybody needs it. There's always going to be somebody there that can help you. Always. Even if you feel like you don't have friends at all, you can still find people.
Sometimes strangers make the best friends
Absolutely. I've
because they
met,
say the most off the wall, perfect things in the best timing. And you're like,
yes,
wow, I really
I
needed
have
that.
literally went to parks, sat down on a bench, and just started talking to absolute strangers I've never met in my
Yeah.
entire life, and they've
And have
changed
never
the
met again.
perspective on that situation in my entire life. And yeah, I'll never meet them again. Probably. I've never seen any of them ever again twice, but it was just like the divine timing of that
Mm-hmm.
one conversation needed to be heard. So those kinds of things can happen. You just have to be willing to open up to that stranger and say, "Look, what do you think about this situation? As you know, you've lived your life. What would you take from this situation?" And they'll be willing, maybe they'll be willing to talk to you, and they'll blow your mind, and you'll be like, "Holy crap, that is a whole new perspective, and it's gonna resonate with you, and it's gonna change your
Plants a
perspective."
seed.
And then that seed will be planted, and you'll start growing in a new direction because you'll start being like, okay, well, now I can head in this direction because of this, and maybe that'll help, and it will eventually help.
You say that. And I just think of all the instances. I think this is why I like flying so much because some poor stranger is going to sit next to me on the plane. And you better believe we're going to have a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
And some
I've
people,
had
they
that
just
going to Hawaii.
pretend to fall asleep on you. And you're like, I know you can still hear me.
Yeah. No, it happens though. It happens anywhere. It can happen somewhere you've been a million times or somewhere you've never been, a new place you've ever gone. And
But
the
even still, to give that plane example, a little bit of energy, there was recently a time where I was on a plane and this person had very negative energy towards me because of my kids being kids, right? And they also had kids and they were sitting in front of me. And I was like, that's just so unfortunate that this person who should understand, you know, is not able to understand that my child is being a child right now. And the plane hadn't even taken off. It was like the first 10, 15 minutes of the flight. And I was determined in that moment to just cold stare to the back of her head for the entire ride and be like, I can't believe this person. Can you believe this person? And then I was going to be that person. And that something softened my heart. And I said, you know what? She's traveling. She's got kids. It's possible that she's stressed and just having a moment and reacted at me in a way that had nothing to do with me. And I just thought to myself, I hope that she has a really pleasant flight and that my kids and I have only done what we can do and we can only change so much sitting on a plane. And just changing that energy by the end of the flight, which was a 4.5 hour flight, by the end of the flight, we had talked for over an hour and a half, and I was able to give her information that she was needing about her kids because turns out her kids were very similar to mine, and she was feeling very, very stressed. And she reacted just like I anticipated because she was overwhelmed. But my energy towards her, if I was like, oh, you're so negative, you're so negative, you're so negative, like that would have been a miserable flight. And it took me a moment to just change what I wanted to attract into my life and say, hey, maybe this person's human and maybe we could have a positive moment. And then turned out we had an hour and a half
well,
of a wonderful
90%.
conversation.
Yeah, 90% of people's anger towards somebody else is projection of
Nothing
their
to
own
do.
life.
Yeah.
It's something in their own life that's making them angry. I used to lash out when I was angry too, and then I started looking at myself and I was like, wait a minute, why am I really lashing out? Am I angry at this person or am I angry because of something inside of me? And it really was
Mm-hmm.
in something inside of me. And now I hardly ever get angry. It takes
Mm-hmm.
a crap load to get me angry unless I'm sitting in traffic. That is not for me. I do
Or
I do
riding on
not
a
do
plane.
sitting. Yeah, or riding on a plane. I don't do well in those situations, but
Yeah, absolutely. It's a projection of what other people, it has a lot more to do with us than it has to do with the other person. But the point of the airplane example was even just changing our energy of how we perceive a situation will attract different energy. So if we're going to sit there and think something's negative, then we're going to continue to attract negativity towards us. If we change our perspective and be like, you know what, I'm determined to have this be a positive moment, then that ripple effects into the environment around us.
well, I think that's a good reason why when you become capable, like for me, I'm very much capable of absorbing other people's energy and just
Mm-hmm.
filtering it through and turning it into positive. When you become that capable, you are really on the right track and you are really doing well for yourself. Because I can absolutely take negative energy, pull it into myself from the other people by just using humor. I use
Yes.
humor and I pull their energy out of them, throw humor into them, and it's a whole different ball game. It's they're laughing now. We're relating to different stories, and the way
They're
to do
laughing
that,
even though you threw balls back at them.
yeah, oh yeah. And then they're just like, yeah, this is it missed, but that was pretty fun, like,
Some
yeah,
people are
that's
real good at dodging that. Some people are determined to like,
dodgeball.
no, no, I will
If
not accept your happiness.
if you could dodge a wrench, you could dodge a ball. Well, you better dodge it. So, and that's really what it is. That's the secret. That's the key to transmuting energy is just
Mm-hmm.
taking, looking at it and saying, okay, what's really going on? And then being like, okay, well, let's shift it over here to this, and maybe we can use this to combat it. And I will always use comedy and goofiness and jokes and just weird tactics that most people will be like, well, that's weird, but
Well,
that made
it's
me feel
weird
better.
because it's only weird because I think
That's not their
Joshua,
norm.
well, it's not, I was just gonna say it's not their normal. And for you to, so for you being in that space where you can, like you said, transmute negative energy into positive energy, whether it's yours or somebody else's, that didn't come overnight. Your
No,
first
it's a lot of
instance was
experience.
12 years ago, 13 years ago when I was 25. Now, over a decade later, this is that muscle that you've built, right?
But even before that, I was able to do that. I just
But
didn't
not
do
with
that
such
within myself,
consistency.
right? And
Hmm.
consistency.
Right.
And even within myself, I had troubles. I did that well for everyone else, but even within myself, I didn't have
But
that
you had to
self-love for
sit
myself.
in your own journey
And
and
now
figure it out.
I can just now it's like a muscle memory. Now it's just, oh, this is what's going on. I can hear, and maybe I can help you.
Mhm.
Or hey, check this out. Or even with my kids, like when they're having bad temperaments or bad energy, and there's something bothering them, and they go into anger, I'll say, oh, look at this situation over here, and just totally blindside them with something else. They'll
Mhm.
forget about that bad thing, and then we'll go back to it later and then they'll end up accomplishing it
Right.
because you
Absolutely.
just have to
Because you
you
removed
just
yourself from the negativity.
and change the perspective for
Hmm.
just a little bit, and then you can look at this situation that you failed in a different light, a different way, a different angle, and you're going to
And
be like, holy
overcome it.
crap, why was that a thing? Why was that even a thing? It was so easy for me to accomplish and win and make it a better situation and finish it. And it
Hmm.
just takes time and repetition. If you don't take the time to do it or learn it or change it and use repetition, you're
Hmm.
gonna you're gonna you're gonna fall back and you're gonna not succeed. And
I think for me too, in that transition phase, the most challenging thing for me was having those moments of growth, having the muscles build up, having the temptations come back in to want to, like, just when you get a muscle built in one way, that fear will try so hard to lateral shift into a different area of your life. And you think, okay, well, there's so many things that are, okay, well, I conquered this one fear and now it's showing up in a different way. And I conquered this one fear and it's showing up in a different way. And it's conquering this one fear. And it can feel very defeating because you're thinking, oh, well, I conquered this one fear and then I showed up in a different way. And now I have to learn how to do that. Like, it's like I'm always overcoming these fears, when the reality is you don't actually have to continually overcome these fears. You have to switch the mindset of, I'm just continuing to learn to love myself in a more abundant way. And these fears are going to come in. I don't have to actually conquer them. I don't have to overcome them. I just have to keep choosing love instead of feeding the fear. And then you notice that the more you start choosing self love, the less it feels like those fears keep lateral shifting and keep coming up in your life, where you start having more and more time of happiness because that's what you're choosing than it is fear. And I think a lot of people, when you're like, well, when people see me be funny, they're like, that's weird. Because most people spend a majority of their life, I think, living in the fear spectrum and spend very little living in the love spectrum. And so when they encounter somebody who's living mostly in the love spectrum, it feels fearful. Like it feels threatening to their lifestyle because they can't understand it. They can't comprehend it. All they've ever done is live. There's an attachment to living in the fear spectrum. And it's almost like
which
you
becomes
have to,
habits.
which is a habit. And so you almost have to, like, for me, the best way I can put words to it is I find myself continually grieving past versions of myself that accepted living in the fear spectrum. Every time I break through and come into more of loving myself at a greater rate, I feel like there's a part of me that I'm letting go that lived in that fear spectrum so much. And recently I had this moment where I broke down in tears of joy because I felt so liberated from this fear that I was letting myself live in that didn't seem like a very big one. And it felt so powerful to me to be like having tears of joy and finally seeing my life for what it is in a state of happiness instead of a state of fear, and having that transition where the fear walls that seemed 10 feet tall concrete came down and I just saw all the love in the world. And having the courage to sit in that love spectrum and not run back to the fear spectrum because that's what's familiar. Because if you sit in that discipline and habit building and keep choosing the love spectrum, it will become the new norm. And it does feel uncomfortable at first because welcome to loving yourself. Like, welcome
Yeah,
to self-love, welcome to a better state of living, welcome to being the ripple effect in other people's lives, where no matter what happens, you see the person in front of you, you're like, I'm going to unconditionally love them. And for you, it's through humor. For other people, it could be from being a great listener. From other people, it could be a great motivated advice giver. Sometimes it could just be like art,
somebody
and
can be an artist, somebody can be.
figuring out what makes you happy, because a lot of people don't give time. Think of all the time we give to the anxiety, the fears, and the overthinking and the worries of life, right? And how much time we give to the things that actually make us happy. I have a feeling for most people that's very outbalanced, you
I think
know?
it's very outbalanced just because of society and the way you have to live and be a part of, and
Keeping up with the Joneses.
especially with technology the way it is now. Like technology can be used both for good and bad. I think the bad part of it is it keeps you in that negative space because you're comparing yourself to every single person on this internet. You don't have what
Mhm.
they have. You don't live the lifestyle they live, so you feel bummed out. Well, that's terrible because
Mhm.
you're not that person. You're your own person. You
You
have your
could
own
never be
habits.
that
You have your
person.
own talents. You have your own desires. And if you focused on yours, you are going to boom and you're going to follow your own path and you're going to
Mhm.
eventually have that lifestyle that you want. And I
It's
guess one
interesting.
thing I want to
Oh,
touch
go
on too,
ahead.
real quick, before
We wrap it up. Mhm.
we touched on the fear spectrum. The love spectrum for everyone listening are things happiness, joy, bliss, and
Gratitude.
kindness, gratitude. These are the love spectrum. These are the emotions that come with love. And when you can sit in those things, when you're a giving person naturally, and giving doesn't have to mean materials, it doesn't have to mean money, it doesn't have to mean this object, it could be even time. I think for me personally, time is the greatest gift you can
Gift.
give somebody because you're not ever going to get time back.
Back.
You can get money back, you can get an obstacle back, you can get it, whatever. You're never going to get time back. So when you invest time into somebody who's hurting or somebody who just needs to be listened to or somebody who needs advice and you just give that time, that shows more gratitude and appreciation and humbleness inside of you for those people. And it shows and their appreciation for you is going to boost your energy as well. So it's a push and a pull
It,
thing.
and with that too, what I'm hearing you say is by holding space for somebody and giving them time, and no matter what that looks like, but like listening to them and what you just said makes me think that like you're modeling for them the thing that they need for themselves that they maybe haven't experienced before.
Absolutely.
A lot of people don't get somebody who cares enough about them to slow down and to just listen. and
Yeah.
to maybe not even give advice. And when we have people in our life that model for us how to slow down and how to be at peace and how to just be listen, and have those people who are in chaos look at you and be like, how are you so calm right now? I
Well,
just dropped this
here's
on
yeah.
you. And you're just like, I mean, okay,
Here's another
and they
way to
learn
identify that too, is
that seed.
because somebody who's in a negative space is going to
Mm-hmm.
try to compare stories with you. Like if
Mm. Yeah,
that's
it's like
one
a
thing you want
toxic one
to,
up.
yeah, you want to stay away from stuff like that, because or people who are, you don't, even if you don't have to stay away from them, you can help try to transition them out of that as well. But when you're
So you have to
speaking
let
to
their story
somebody,
be their story and your story
right,
be yours.
and
And
you just
it's not a
listen.
competition.
Right. And just listen to them and
Right.
say, okay, I'm not even going to present you a story. I'm just here to listen to what you have to say. Because
Mm-hmm.
what happens is we'll tell our story. We'll be like, oh, this thing happened. And then they'll be like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, this other thing happened to me. And this
And
is,
then some.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then some. And then
Right.
this is and it's like, okay, I see what you're doing here. You need, you need to,
Feel validated.
you need to feel validated, and you need someone
And you
then
don't
to
know how to
listen to
feel
you.
validated in a positive way. So you're needing to feel validated through your trauma.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something that you have to watch out for, and kind of like step back from if that's the kind of people you're around. And that's part of that transition, because once you start making those changes, you're naturally going to change everything about you. You're going to change your environment. You're going to change the
Mm-hmm.
people you hang out with, where you're going, you know, it's going to happen naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not even going to notice it. And people are going to come back to you years down the road and be like, wow, man, you really changed. And where'd you go? And what happened? And you're going to be like, well, I grew up and I grew and I kept going forward. And you guys just kind of stayed the same. It's not that you're bad people or that I don't like you. It's just I
Mm-hmm.
continued to go forward because this is what I wanted. I wanted better for myself, and you guys weren't willing to grow in process with me. You just wanted to stay in this space that you have, and that's
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately
It's
not a good.
challenging
It's challenging.
because a lot of times too, you can have, like, when you decide to change as well, you're going to have a lot of life experiences. The more you get comfortable with the idea that you're willing to surrender to yourself and to change and to let the love spectrum take over, you're going to start changing at such a fast rate that you will become so unfamiliar to people very quickly. I mean, and it can happen over a week time. I mean, you just went through this big experience where you had a massive transformation
Took
where it
5 days.
took five
5 days.
days.
It
And I
transformed me
Yep,
immensely.
because we went on that trip together, and I went my own way and did my own thing, and you did your own thing, and you changed, and I came back from that too, having my own experiences and having people in my life look at me and be like, "You're different now." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I hope so." I found independence and self-love, not a ton, but enough where it really kickstarted me wanting that so much more, and not being afraid to take the chances and the necessary risks to get that at no cost, as long as it's not the cost of other people, but for myself, like, I'm willing to put in the work and the discipline to continue growing in independence and self-love. And that can be threatening to people when they're not understanding that change. But I wanted to say with the love spectrum that it's such a beautiful process. And for those who are working through this transition of recognizing and having the self-awareness, I just want to give credit to right there, like, having the willingness to have the self-awareness that you can contemplate, maybe I have this fear of running my life, is the start of you entering into the love spectrum, because you're loving yourself enough to be like, I love myself and care enough that I know nobody else can change this for me but me. And I'm just going to accept that possibility, which we talked about, I think, in the first episode, that thought becomes action, and
Hmm.
that action becomes habit, and that habit becomes discipline, and the discipline becomes motivation for a better life. And having that first moment when you recognize that you might be sitting in the fear spectrum is, like, kudos. And don't let it stop there. A lot of people, they'll make a little bit of progress and be like, oh, I overcame this one thing, so now I'm a better person. And I was like, oh, you got a long way to go, you know?
Yeah.
And but you have, but the, because, and the, when they first come out of that fear spectrum, there's almost like a constant need for validation for some people, as they're coming out of it. I mean, for me, that was definitely the case. I want to be validated for all the growth. But again, the more that you come out of the fear spectrum, you're no longer seeking that external validation, you finding it internally, and you find that your own validation towards yourself is the greatest reward. And the more you feed that, you realize that you actually become closer to, your spirituality and your God source too, because your gratitude means something different. And for me, I picked one thing in the love spectrum that I wanted to focus on. And it was because you sent me this video from Alan Watts where he said, if you just say thank you for the lessons that I'm going to have today or whatever. And I started doing that. And it was so impactful because I remembered every day on my drive to drop my kids off at school, I would say, thank you for, and I would think about all the things that I wanted positively to come from the day. And it wasn't finite things like I have $1 million. It was, thank you for having the courage to overcome that obstacle that I wasn't aware that I needed to overcome today. And like stuff like that, kind of vague, but also kind of specific. And the more I started doing that, the quicker things started happening for me. And the day that I stopped doing that and became focused on the day and not the gratitude that I was going to get from the day, like I started spiraling back into my negative habits because my focus wasn't on the present and the gratitude and the love spectrum. It became sporadic and it went to look for familiar, and I started backsliding into negative self-sabotaging like thought processes. And I had to catch myself and pick myself back up and being like, ooh, I'm being that person again. Let's not do that. Let's remember you're a person with all these qualities that we've developed. And I had to check myself and I had to reset myself. And because I let myself backslide, I kept trying to backslide, and I had to kept catching myself until, you just hit yourself in the head and you're like, nope, we're not doing this anymore. Remember, focus on gratitude. And I had to take
Discipline.
the physical action that I had to take to reset it was physical activity. Like I was like, okay, remember how we show ourselves self-love when nothing else is working, we do a workout. And so I did 30 minutes of like a workout of, squats and random other things just to be like, and that helped me reset because I was like, that was the habit that I built to show my body that I love myself. And when the habit came in physically, the mental state followed. And so, you're not always going to be mentally strong. And that's why the physical and the mental have to be hand in hand, because you need to fall back on each other, and when your body's sick with an ailment or something, like then you have to be mentally strong. And then, it's great when those are in balance and you can work together. But that's why the physical component and building yourself up out of the fear spectrum, because a lot of times people live in the fear spectrum because they don't like who they are. You don't like who you are, you got to change it. You
Absolutely.
gotta pick one thing you want to improve in yourself and dedicate to loving yourself through that change. And then you'll notice how quickly everything else starts just adding on as you do that. And the momentum is just such a snowball effect, such a ripple effect into all areas of your life. So is there anything, Joshua, that you wanted to like give as a piece of encouragement or humor or
Yeah.
enlightenment that for this people as they're transitioning out of their fears and having the courage to love themselves more into a better enlightenment?
Yeah, sure. I would say I would leave you with this moment in your life of transition is going to be scary, and you have to enjoy that fear. Because
Mm-hmm.
once you start enjoying it, you're going to give yourself to that other side. Because fear likes when you stay and dwell in it. But when you
Mm-hmm.
start to say, oh, I love you, fear. I love you because you're helping me grow. I
There's
love
a
you
purpose for
because
you.
there's purpose in my life now. I now have this direction that I want to go in. Yes, it is scary. It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
scary and it's going to be very difficult. It's not an easy process and it never will be. It's not meant to be. But once you get started and you get further ahead, it
Mm-hmm.
just gets great. It just gets better and it just you feel lighter, you feel happier, you feel just everything around you and you're going to be more abundant in your lifestyle and caring and giving, and that's going to come natural, but it is going to be scary, and you should embrace the fear to get out of the fear, if that makes any sense. And just enjoy the process and trust the process, because it's not easy and it is very scary, but the only way to get to the other side is to face it, and you have to be willing to do that.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of just a little bit of like Wile E. Coyote and Bugs Bunny. Because
Yeah.
like Wile E. Coyote is always trying to trap Bugs Bunny. And
No, he's
sometimes
always
like,
trying to catch the Roadrunner.
oh, the Roadrunner. Yes, that's what it is. Yeah, the Roadrunner. And the Roadrunner sometimes like entertains him long enough to be like, I'll stand here in your trap so you think it's gonna work, and then like splits last second and flips it around on him. And so if you can think of those characters, like, like your fear is Wile E. Coyote and your like love spectrum is the Roadrunner, just loving life, minding himself in the present, and just going from thing to thing with just complete joy and
And
excitement
confidence
and bold confidence. Like, it's like, I will stare fear in the face and let that fall and still get away last second and just
I'll stand
own
on your
it.
TNT.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you won't get it. It won't work.
It's not
Sorry.
going to work. You can't catch me, and if you have that kind of confidence in yourself, for me, the thing I think I want to leave with the listeners is don't get focused too much in the how. Like we often, especially if anyone's like me and they're an overthinker, the process of getting stuck in the how is like, okay, I'm in fear and I want to get out of fear. How do I do that? What do I do? And you spend more energy thinking about the how instead of just letting yourself be calm and be present in the moment and to slow down. If ever there's like a moment where you're not sure how, the answer is always taking a deep breath, being present in the moment, and redirecting your focus. That's the how. And just continue to refuse to look back. I
Just keep
recently
moving forward. Yeah.
I told that to myself recently. I saw a quote that said it was like a person with, I think it was the Dalai Lama or something. And they're like, oh, Dalai Lama, like, I love you and you're amazing. And I want to marry you, which, can't happen. And he said, well, you don't want to marry me. You actually want to marry my much more handsome, successful brother behind me. And the person looked back and they said, there's nobody there. And he said, if you loved me, you would never have looked back. And and I think if we do that to ourselves, where we just I started saying that to myself, is like, if I love myself, I will refuse to look back. And if I do look back, it's to use it as like a growth tool, but not as a like allowing myself to be stuck, like oh, look at how far I've come, kind of a thing, and not like well, let's look back at the past and get stuck there. And so challenge yourself that to not focus on the how. And if you need to, the how is always take a deep breath and be present in the moment and finding gratitude, and to love yourself enough to not look back, because you're not the same person that you were this morning or 5 minutes ago or even an hour ago or a week ago. And if you have the courage to never look back and to accept yourself in a loving state where you are in this very current moment moving forward, I guarantee you it's going to give you so much abundance and the tools that you need to get to where you want to go. Don't worry about that either, because they will come, and they will come in ways you never expected it. So don't even plan on figuring out the tools on the way, because they're going to come towards you without you needing to manipulate or control the situation. So
Absolutely. I love
just
that.
keep breathing and love yourself enough to never look back.
Give it to the river.
Give it to the river and let it keep on rolling.
Keep on flowing.
So yeah. So no, I think this
Flowing
was a
down the
great episode.
river.
And so I think this went really great, and I'm really excited for all that we shared.
And in the meantime, while you're waiting for the next episode, we would love to hear from each and every one of you listening, comments, suggestions, topics, anything that you think that would fit into our podcast, and ideas to help you and get your minds going and keep you flowing. We would love that.
Yeah, so definitely leave a comment, subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, and share it with somebody that you think might benefit from it, or, share it on your social media as well, because the more we get out there, the more people we can affect, and you can be a part of that progress too. So let's change the world together. All right. Until next time.
Have a blessed